Hello, I'm Tania Ramalho, a professor at State University of New York in Oswego, New York, and I'm here to share my work on teaching political perspectives. My students are all teachers, and they are engaged in the master's degree program in education, both in literacy and as well as in plain education master's degree. So I'm going to start my sharing my screen now. Teaching political perspectives. My background. When I was a graduate student, I did not know that I did not know about political perspectives. I could not distinguish them at all. And in a sense, there was a sense of disorientation. And my idea was like, maybe that's because I'm an immigrant and I do not understand who's who here and what are they saying really. So I thought that was plausible. But at the same time, I knew that I didn't quite understand what was happening in my home country of Brazil either. So that I knew that it was a bigger problem. Now, how did that come about? I had a fundamental text in one of my classes, and it was Alison Jagger and Paula Rothenberg's Feminist Frameworks, Alternative Theoretical Accounts of the Relations Between Women and Men. In this book, the authors are discussing, and they provide texts from different backgrounds, starting with the non-feminist conservative, and then they go on to liberal, and then to different forms of socialist, Marxist, feminism. So that was the first time I was exposed with those differences, and I could read in the language. Of course, that was a big insight for me. And I started understanding when I read regular newspapers or watched people on television talk, and I could see the differences for the first time. Of course, later, Alison Jagger, a feminist philosopher, who's actually British, who moved to the United States, wrote a whole book on feminist politics and human nature. By then, I had the basics. And of course, later, I read George Lakoff, Moral Politics, How Liberals and Conservatives Think. So over time, I was able to create a simpler vision that I could share with my students. So I had a capacity to understand political perspectives within feminism in the beginning, and that led to a generalization to conservative, liberal, and critical perspectives in society. So I use those three dimensions to classify the perspectives with my students. So as a teacher educator, I had a charge to work with my students to understand social justice issues in the United States. And that had to do with socioeconomic injustices, especially with poverty, sex and gender and sexuality, race and ethnicity, ability, body image, adult relations with youth, and human relations with nature. So all of those um, perspectives that have social justice issues within them was part of my charge. But all of these implying complex political perspectives so that a basic understanding of political perspectives will help you understand how different social justice issues are interpreted or represented about those issues. So most of my students do not have a clear understanding of political perspectives. And that's a whole presentation in itself to see how they really understand political perspectives. Now, why is it important for teachers in particular to know about political perspectives? Well, they are going to be models of citizenship, always. They are models as voters. Schools, either in elementary school or in high school, when it's election time, that's a topic of discussion, maybe not formalized in the curriculum, but still. And then students often are curious about teachers' lives. So their voting lives is that, though there is a silence about that, really. Teachers do not reveal who they are voting for. Finally, and the most important, teachers are curriculum leaders. And as curriculum leaders, they have to address several issues that have different political perspectives. So, including, of course, elections, but not limited to elections. So they are curriculum leaders, and including issues that are political in their curriculum is very important. So my idea is how to simplify political perspective to make them understandable in the context of the United States. So here we talk about conservatives and liberals, which is part of the Western tradition anyway. And I'm sure that this applies to any kind of country. These perspectives are hegemonic here, and the pendulum, the political pendulum, has oscillated from the to the right since mid-century. The U.S. has become more and more and more conservative. And there are two mainstream political parties that represent these standpoints. In fact, all election in the United States is between those two parties, one conservative, the Republican Party, and one that is more liberal, though it has become more and more conservative since 1950s, and that is the Democratic Party. There are many other parties, of course, but they do not get to be represented. They may ally with one or the other of the main political parties, but they really do not. They do not run themselves, right? So conservative and liberal, very clear positions. And then I put everybody else in this critical political perspectives. And of course, when I discuss with them, I go just back to Marx and discuss Marxism. And I say that they are above all critical of capitalism. That's what Marx did. He studied that, and the people who followed him discussed several of the ideas and theories in his work, and that we've had a whole group, many authors that talk about Marxism and their ideas, their visions about alternative social, political, economic, and cultural systems, which I call the specs. But one of the things that distinguishes all of those perspectives that are critical is that they are critical of the isms: elitism, classism, racism, sexism, heterosexism, ableism, speciesism, etc. So, for instance, the movement, the Black Lives Matter movement, for instance, they are looking into specifically race issues so that they would be enveloped by my critical political perspectives, because they envision a very different, an alternative social, political, economic, and cultural systems for African American people, right? Groups that are doing work with climate change or with environmental issues, they are part of what I call here the speciesisms, right? The humans being overruling over nature, so that they too would be part of critical political perspectives. Any of the feminists that are not liberal feminists would be part of the critical political perspective. So this critical political perspective is really a bucket for many different groups, as well as, of course, the whole Marxist and their critics, theorists that we've had. So there's no third-party representation in the US, as I discussed, because there are only two parties that are fundamentally conservative or liberal. So if they exist as parties, but they are third parties. So what 6 major elements characterize a political perspectives? This is what I want my students to understand, that to have a political perspective, you have to have a vision of the following. And the first one is the views of human nature. What does it constitute a human being? You know, where do we come from? Then, all right, what are the legitimate sources of knowledge that we support? You know, because there's knowledge that we do not support. So in this political perspective, what is considered a legitimate source of knowledge? Then we have views of society, the family, and social classes. You know, these are interrelated. A view of the economy, a view of the state and government, and a view of what constitutes social change and the agents of social change. So these 6 elements need to be really clear. They are interrelated, and you need to see their coherence. So political perspectives informs other views about sex and gender and sexuality. So you have a conservative, a liberal, and critical ways of looking at sex, gender, and sexuality, and all of the other issues here: race, ethnicity, ability, lookism, age, generations, education, religion, nationality, global society, and nature, so that fundamental political perspectives will inform these perspectives. And here's the chart I share with my student. I don't expect you to be able to read here, but I just wanted to show that I call it a simple representation of political ideological perspectives. We have the extreme left, we have a center, and an extreme right on the right, and the views are, the conservatives are on the right, and we have the liberals, as you can see, liberal, right? And then do you see that there is a division? It's not just one line, but 2 lines, because I want to make sure that they understand that the critical is separate in the sense that they are really critical of the economic system, and that determines their major difference, okay? So this is the chart, and I'm going to provide snippets of the details of this chart, okay? So here's the conservative, and I really, recently I encapsulated in this sentence: to be what we have always been. And my students really got that. So we start with human nature. God shapes our nature. It has a biological basis that we can't overcome. So if you think in a conservative way, that's basically what you understand humans to be. Many of the conservatives here are religious, though I understand that there's a difference between religious and political conservatives here in the United States, but still the basis of religion is so strong, you know, that this God-shaped nature is very, very important to understand. Humans as a whole and individually are regarded as selfish, undisciplined, and sinful. Any needs of punishment for self-discipline and atonement for sins. This is very much informed by Lakoff's understanding of the psychology of conservatism in this country. So So we have human nature, we have legitimate source of knowledge, and a view of society that's basically functionalist, right? And we explain or recall what that means. And here we have a view of the economy as completely being pro-capitalist with laissez-faire, right? And with support for neoliberal um, policies. Neoliberalism is a conservative economic perspective. There's no question about that. Um, the state and government views in view of social change is basically a social Darwinist. Um, the survival of the fittest, the market will decide, God makes changes. Um, so these are the 6 basic views of conservatism. Then we have liberals, and here I say we want to fix what we are. And our human nature is shaped by biology, yes, but also by history and society. And we are mostly self-interest individuals, members of groups. Through reason, we are learning self-discipline and how to treat others fairly. And that's why we can change what we've been, right? So again, legitimate source of knowledge from a liberal perspective, a functionalist view of society still, the economist still pro-capitalist with a little economic planning, a little control of corporations, but still recently in the United States is affected by the dominance of neoliberal policies. So we also have state and government and the social change theories here. Here, the theory of social change is more evolutionary, right? And the government provides an opportunity for the citizens through regulatory laws, etc. So let's move on to our critical perspectives is that how we can build what we can become. And that's basically this vision, or some call it utopian vision, but it's really where we get the ideas of how we can change. Here, again, history, society, biology shapes our natures, but we are developing species on Earth. Through our history and evolution, humans are learning to cooperate, to treat each other fairly, and be self-disciplined and loving. My students who are teachers really like that. So I say that is a utopian vision that is very much critical of who we are at the moment. So legitimate sorts of knowledge. I emphasize that there are critical views of knowledge that are very inclusive, including indigenous source of knowledge. Society here is seen through a conflict theory perspective, which is Marxist, and then we are made up of social classes that have interests and that they conflict with each other. The economy for sure is anti-capitalism, and it is for pro-cooperation between us so that everybody is supported in some fashion. So there are many views of that, including mixed economies. So I never really say, oh, we need to be socialist or communist or any of that, because I do believe that we will be figuring out what ways we will create so that we have an economy that's fairer for all and for nature, of course. Then a view of the state and government, where the historical materialist theory is central, and social change and theories of agent. I just basically wrote historical materialism, though I understand that's a real Western perspective, and I need to know more to see what other perspectives on social change are there, so I can maybe refashion. This is pretty much an ongoing work, not only for my students, but for myself as well. So here's the assignments that in relation to this topic that I give to my students. I have them read a chapter on political perspectives that I wrote in my book in progress. I have them reading the chart that I showed to you, and try to figure it out. And they can ask questions, of course. I have them read the Democratic, the Republican, and Green parties' platforms, so that they start translating that abstract theoretical knowledge in the chapter and in the chart to actual visions of these parties in terms of what they believe and what they want to accomplish, their vision for societies, right? I have them identify political perspectives in newspaper articles, and I collect them, and I have them choose articles so that they can identify the political perspective of that particular author or authors. Then we have them identify political perspectives in political cartoons. I'm very personally fond of political cartoons because they communicate so much, so that it's important that they know how to read those from political perspectives that they've learned. I have them identify languages that indicate political perspectives in the platforms so that they know what, when they read, oh, this is what they mean, and this is where their vision for society or their vision for the economy and things like that. And discussions, of course. And finally, embodied pedagogy, really role playing what it feels like being a conservative, what feels like being a liberal, and what it feels like being a person who's coming from a critical perspectives, so that those feelings and those are part of their learning. And I'm more and more a believer in embodied pedagogy as well as embodied cognition, so that unfortunately, in these days of COVID, we haven't been able to do that. So here's some of my students' comments. When this is after they read the first materials, I thought that both of the readings and the chart for the week were extremely informative, and I learned a lot from them. I have never really been interested in politics or economics, so I only knew the things I heard at home and at school. My parents are not very political either, so I was free to make my own decisions. I never actively researched political parties or what they stood for. So until I read the chapters until I read the chapters this week, I really had no idea what perspective even matched my views. And that's exactly, she summarizes exactly where I was when I started doing this understanding and then doing this work. I have just two more. I would first like to admit that I'm not the most knowledgeable about politics. Since I first learned about what politics were, I was always taught it was a sensitive subject, and learned that you should not ask people who they voted for or what party they belong with. Most people follow the footsteps of what their family perspectives or politics are. And in fact, I really tell that the research shows that. And so I want my students to feel reassured that whatever they believe is, connected to where they came from, and that if they want to change, they can change it. So I feel embarrassed that I do not exactly know what party to belong to. The media has a huge influence on how people look at politics and give out false information. So these are issues we discuss. So the third and last student, I was surprised at the abundance of knowledge I gained from reading. Over the past several years, I have started to understand politics on a deeper level and have recognized my privilege to a greater extent. I grew up thinking that politics was something that I couldn't avoid, something that didn't directly affect my life, and something that I couldn't change. Now, I see the importance of understanding the many aspects of politics, and I realize the impact that politics have on all our lives. So these are from reflections. These reflections are not graded. Um, and I really ask them to be as honest and as forthcoming as they can possibly be. And I really do believe that this work has an impact. So the importance of teaching political perspectives, they are ignored and misunderstood. There's disgust and fear of politics, a deep sense of alienation. While they are essential to citizenship, essential to voting behavior, if you teach, it will, the world clarifies, because you can see political perspectives. It's just about any representation in your environment. Um, and often I've had this, I haven't counted yet, but it has an impact on the political perspectives and party affiliation. So people say, oh, I used to vote for this, I will not vote for so and so anymore. So when I get that response from students, I pretend to be very serious, but I'm very, very glad that they can clarify and make a choice. Um, so thank you. This brings us to the end. I'm going to stop sharing. Thank you. I'm Tania Ramalho, sharing on political perspectives.